Hi, Josh.
Hello, Josh.
I want to start here. In July of 2019, it was Tails. It was Friday, which means it was Pig and Punch. I was eating gelato and looking at you from a distance. You were folding tank tops. We'd never met before. I knew of you loosely from some articles that I read, mostly from what I loved that you did with menus. And in the little bar that I was managing at the time, we were doing themed menus, and they were fun. And I think the fact that you made something like that so rad, it really opened my eyes to what was possible beyond just making a cocktail. At this time, I was also almost 2 years sober. I hadn't started talking about it yet because I didn't really know how to. I was still kind of like building my own vocabulary about how I was feeling. Forever still felt very far away and not something that was practiced. And as I watched you, you were alone for the first time. Usually people were coming up to you and asking you a bunch of questions and stuff like that. And you were just in this sort of like Zen mode. You weren't frantic. You didn't look like somebody who was, running one of the biggest parties at one of the largest conventions in the whole world. You just looked like somebody who was cool. And I really dug that. And I think that at that time, you really embodied what I found in the practice of creating awesome menus is that in you, I saw somebody who could just casually show up in the world and be cool and not necessarily have to fully work something. And that struck me at a time because I didn't go to rehab to quit drinking. I didn't work a program to quit drinking. I was trying to stop drinking and I was also trying to figure out who the fuck I was. And in seeing that in you, that was really inspiring to me. And then after that day, I watched you closer. I watched you closer because I didn't get up the courage to go chat to you because at that time and me discovering my own sobriety, I didn't know how to talk to people about it because the only stories that I'd heard were disaster stories. And I didn't hear a story that sounded like my story. And not hearing that, I didn't talk about it. And then further down the line, LP and Alex heard what little rumblings I had shared about my sobriety, which is when I started noticing the gifts that arrive from it, which was I look better, I feel better, my eyes are clear when somebody takes a picture of me. And I started to develop who I was becoming as a person. And then I started No Proof. And you were my second ever episode. And I'm super proud to bring you back on because at that time I wrote a list of questions. And instead of like really listening and having a great conversation, which is what this show has become, I was kind of ticking boxes as wanting to list all of these questions out and make sure that they were all answered because I didn't want people to miss out on that stuff. In that time, since that episode, you've become one of my better friends in this industry. You're still a mentor to me. You're somebody that I still look up to. I still have those kind of like stargazing looks at you as I did that first day. And now I get to run with you. Now I get to make drinks with you. And now, almost 5 years later, I get to talk to you again. Somebody who is much more defined in their own sobriety, somebody who still looks up to you, who is defined in their sobriety, somebody who is now a titan in their sobriety, who just celebrated 21 years last year. And that's all to say, I love you, Josh Harris. Welcome to No Proof. Thanks for doing this episode.
Hey, I love you too, Josh Gandee. I'm happy to be back. It's exciting. I couldn't believe when you shared with me the date of our first conversation on No Proof, how long ago that was in December of 2020. The mind reels with what must have been going on in my head, what was going on in your head, certainly my recollection of what was going on in the world and how any of that related to our conversation and thinking about how much different the conversation is that we will probably have today, both from the context of change in the world, but also like I in many ways don't feel anything like I was 5 years ago in so many respects. And I guess from a sobriety point of view, from a numerical sobriety point of view, and obviously at that time, I would have had also a lot of time sober.
Yeah.
And, I feel like I couldn't be in a more different place than I was at that time.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit about that, about how, even at that time, like I said, I was like 2 years sober. I'm coming up on 8 this year. I feel like I wear my sobriety so much different than I did back then. In that lead up, it was something that I was still kind of like figuring out. And it was almost like I had to like walk through a mantra of what sobriety was. I had to have almost like the daily reminder that I was a sober person, where now it has become so entrenched in who I am. It's almost like something that I don't really think about. Like it's omnipresent in a way, but I don't feel like I have to step through the filter of defining myself as a sober person before I just kind of act as an individual. Where would you say
Mm.
you're living in your sobriety now?
I find myself feeling very proud of my sobriety. And, I don't necessarily feel like I take those moments to think about it or to run things through that filter in the same way. But I do feel like I have, had an ever increasing galvanization of my sobriety, not with respect to whether I'm going to be sober or not, but with respect to how much of my personality I feel like is defined by that, what role it plays in terms of, what I present to the world, what role it plays in terms of, my ego, um, certainly, you know, significant with respect to the industry that I'm in. And I think that of non-alcoholic, the non-alcoholic world is so much different now than it was, for example, when we spoke before. And so, how I fit into that professionally also, I think, is significant. Um, but none of this feels like, you know, it's a question of whether I'll be sober or not. It's just a question of what that means for me and how I walk through the world. And then there's private stuff too. I mean, not like private, like we're not going to talk about it, but just, there's like the emotional parts of that and the therapeutic parts of it, and the growth and what that all means.
Yeah, I can relate because I feel like those are the things that keep me sober, but not necessarily the things that got me sober.
Mm, hmm.
Like I talk about how I know what yesterday feels like. I've done that. I've had that experience. Even if I do kind of like get the feeling that, oh man, I could have a drink in this moment, or, life's really hard. Like I don't really, first of all, I'm fortunate that I don't really have those thoughts that like a drink would come to mind. And I think it's because I've done such a good job of growing into a life that I'm living well, that I can kind of like live beyond those thoughts. But in
Hmm.
doing so, it's prevented me from even caring about what yesterday would be like. In early sobriety, I would have those thoughts of just like, man, I wonder what I would be like if I went back to drinking. Like, have I grown out of it? But now I'm so far in the other direction that I've received the gifts from the kind of like future facing side of sobriety that who cares what yesterday is like? I've had that experience. I haven't had tomorrow yet. And that's thrilling to me.
Hmm. Yeah, it's making me think of an interaction that I had with somebody a couple weeks ago, and they said some things to me that made me really sad and that I felt were like unjustified and off base. And I've been like thinking about it a lot kind of doing some work around, how I've felt about that. And I was talking about it with my wife yesterday, and she asked me how I was feeling about it. And I said that I feel better about it because I think that time changes your relationship with an incident, like as you move further away from it. And then she was like, well, I'm glad that you're feeling better about it. And then I said, well, like, I'm not feeling better about it. I feel the same way that I felt about it before. I'm just kind of like not as sad about it because time has gone by. And then I was like, but that's also like not something that I'm unfamiliar with, because I feel like the bad fades away and you're left with the good. And I've had that experience with my sobriety I shared. And when I take this whole snapshot of my life addicted to substance, oftentimes, like, the visceral darkness and pain is not what I can viscerally remember now. It's like after you think about, you know, some decent good memories and some stuff like that, then there's this like intellectual understanding of the things that you went through, but there's not this same like uh you know vibrational feeling of the pain that you went through with each day that goes by. And I think that that's something that, like, I, I know can be dangerous for people, because, like, if you lose sight of the thing that brought you there, like that, that might be, something that like ends up tricking your mind. But it was interesting, sort of having this parallel thought with something that didn't have anything to do with my sobriety, and thinking about this interaction that I had with this person, and like how sad it was making me feel, and the fact that I'm like not as sad about it now. And, but that I still, when I still feel the same way about it, it's just, I just don't feel like I'm just not as down. Like I'm like, kind of like living my life like, okay, it happened. But, then when I think about it, I'm just like, man, that was fucked up, you know?
There's also it has me thinking about how, sometimes I have the worry about being susceptible to kind of like the old triggers that I had before I decided to get sober. But those triggers don't have the same effect on a different person. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
that individual anymore. And I think it's hard sometimes to like have that recognition of really how many tools I put in place to kind of like make myself better in that arena. It's hard to view through a different lens of like, well, how would I have approached this back then? Because I've, kind of like grown out of like the mindset that I had to
Mm-hmm.
become like this version
Mm-hmm.
of myself. How does it
Yeah.
feel for you looking back on the versions of yourself that, not even before you got sober, but I feel like you were a different version of yourself when I met you 5 years ago. And I've watched you grow so much through that, through, panic and injury and everything
Mm-hmm.
in between. How do you think about yourself when you think about the different versions that you've kind of grown through?
I feel like, it's kind of like chapters in a novel. Like, some chapters are better than others, but that the whole story is good. And so when I like look at these different chapters, I don't necessarily think it's linear. It's not like each chapter was better than the last. 'Cause I don't think that life works that way. But I will say that the chapter that I find myself in now feels much more emotionally complex than any chapter that I've been in before. And I hesitated at that moment for how to describe that, because in that moment I wasn't ready to sort of label it as good or bad or anywhere on that spectrum per se. I mean, I guess I'll call it good, but um, you know, it doesn't come without discomfort. And so this has been like a really, it's been a really hard time for me, because I've been navigating things that I have somehow found a way to keep in a drawer throughout, um, the significant part of my sobriety, and probably just the significant part of my life, sober and not sober. And, those things relate to feeling, connection, powerful emotions, allowing them to exist, interacting with them. And, that's tough for me, because I don't always like the way that all of that feels. And, the way that this relates to my sobriety, I've found, is that just because you get sober doesn't mean that everything is going to change. What changes is that you're sober
Yeah.
as opposed to not being sober. And I don't know if it was ever impressed upon me the level of work that would have been necessary for me to engage in all of these other topics on an ongoing basis, and the impact that it would have on me to do so or not do so. And I sort of found out the hard way, because, as we've talked about in other, uh, off air conversations, I had some experience with panic, and, I would cite those episodes as being the, um, you know, the check valve for all of this that had been undealt with. And also the inability to deal with things in the current or in the future, because I lacked the tools to be able to do it. So it wasn't exclusively like, oh, I just didn't deal with these things from my past. It was, I didn't deal with things from my past, but also, like, wasn't in a position to deal with anything. It was just kind of like all, like kind of disassociative. Um, and now I've found that, as a result of those episodes and the path that it has put me on, that I'm sort of living the opposite of that, where I'm, um, enthusiastically, like, reaching for that which I can feel. And even when what I'm feeling is bad or uncomfortable, I'm able to find something beautiful in that, because to feel has been, something that is so non-existent for me, that, um, I take it as, like, sort of some kind of dark poetry, um, that I'm able to be going through this transformation, if you will.
How did you know you were feeling?
Well, that's a really good question. Um, I've been able to articulate two different kinds of feeling. One is like intellectual feeling, and one is emotional feeling. So there would be instances where something would happen, instances where something would happen, and then when asked, how do you feel about that? It would seem like the correct answer would be to say that I feel angry. But then when I would spend more time exploring that, I would arrive at the conclusion that I didn't feel angry. I just had in my mind that I was supposed to feel angry. And that was what I would label as like, an intellectual feeling. Like, I know that I'm supposed to feel angry, but now that I'm thinking about it, I still don't actually feel anything. And then there would be times where I would be angry and then I could like feel that I was angry. The other night, something was going on and I got angry about a thing that was going on with my work. And like I was almost shaking and I could like feel it in places. And when I speak with my therapist, he's like, when I explain feeling something and he's like, where did you feel it? And I'll like talk about certain feelings. And I kind of feel a lot like up in here, up in my upper chest. And I was like so angry. And, I talked about that later. And again, it was like, despite having such powerfully negative emotions, like overcoming me in that moment, there was still something that outside of the context of that specific event that I was like, wow, this is like really wild and beautiful that I'm like feeling this thing. And it's not just negative emotions, there's like also feeling happy or feeling love. Those are um, not separated or distinct from the bad ones. It's like it kind of is all together. And I've found that I've had equally as challenging time in the past feeling the good things, and with the same sort of distinction where it's like I know that like I'm feeling love in this moment, but then I question whether I'm actually feeling that the way that I should. And then thinking to myself, like, is there something wrong with me? Like, should I feel this more? Is there something that I should like feel actually in a more profound way instead of just sort of this intellectual understanding of like, oh, like I love you.
I can relate to that.
Oh.
Are you are you kind to the version of yourself that had to get sober?
Um, it's a good question. Hold on. Oh, good. Um, I've been I've been thinking a lot about this idea of like, sort of practicing non-judgment against oneself. Something that an idea that I came across when taking a virtual group class on compassion, probably around the time that we talked on the phone, and or when we talked on No Proof for the first time. And it was something that I like spent a lot of time thinking about, like, what does this mean to like be non-judgmental with oneself? And originally I used that on sort of like a much less deep level, where if and when I was practicing meditation, and inevitably when my mind would move away from the cues and the focus of that meditative moment to something else, that I would have this idea of practicing non-judgment towards oneself there to save me from criticizing myself for like not being good at meditation or not doing it right or not getting like the value of what was supposed to happen. And recognizing that like that was all fine, like that was all part of it. And as I've had that in my vocabulary and some of that understanding, I think that I've grown with that a little bit. And so I do, I think, show myself a lot of grace when it comes to my life in general. And, I'll circle back to your question in a second, because I don't think it's as obvious for me to think about myself at that time, but I certainly think a lot about myself yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's been really important to me to like show myself that compassion and recognize like the journey that I'm on. And, I don't, I try not to get like down on myself in that way. When I look back at being sober, you know, before I got sober, I mean, I'm pretty proud of myself, honestly, because I made the decision to get sober and did all the work to do it. So, I give myself a pat on the back for that. I look at the, the fucked up things that I did and, save for like a little bit of embarrassment. Like, I don't think that I pass too much judgment on myself. But I say all that with the caveat that I'm very fortunate that in my uh, addiction, I did not do anything that caused severe or irreparable damage, like cause anybody injury or death. And shit, that's like the first thing that comes to mind, you know? And I don't have to live with the permanence of any mistakes like that maybe would cause me to, have a different relationship with myself at that time. Um, I will say that I'm like a little bit tough love about all this stuff. And I find myself projecting some of that into the world today. Uh, the things that I see here in San Francisco, not exclusively unique to San Francisco, but, there's a significant substance abuse problem that we have here. And I find myself like not having a lot of kindness for that situation. And I reflect on that a lot. And I keep on like arriving at this thought that like you have to want the change in your life. Nobody else can want it for you. People can help you get the tools, but then you need to like build something with the tools. And when I look at myself, I feel like I said I need the tools. I went to a place where I could get the tools. They gave me the tools. And then I built the house with the tools. And I feel really proud of that. And so I, you know, regularly feel a lack of compassion for people that I don't see like engaging in, um, you know, um, don't see engaging with themselves to help themselves. And this, you know, like the hopelessness and the crime that comes along with that. So it has been something that I've thought a lot about, that, you know, your question provokes to me, where it's like, hey, like I've, you know, I find that I have probably been kind to my former self, but, you know, maybe not so kind to people that I can see some of myself in, uh, but, you know, are behaving differently. It's complicated.
I ask because I feel like I wasn't until pretty recently. And I think it kind of like took me realizing that the guy that got sober and me are the same person. I
Mm,
feel like I spent a long time thinking that I am somebody that grew away from that person instead of I pulled that person through to now. And in doing so, the bad parts get stripped off and that I am what's left. And I feel like it was much easier for me to be unkind to a person that I thought was not me
mm,
than it was trying to find the parts of me from now in that person who didn't have those tools or didn't even really know where to look for them. And
mm,
now I'm able to look back with much more kindness on who I was at that time because, you know, I kind of, in looking back on that history, I can kind of like pinpoint just small capsules of that time. But then I was doing myself a disservice by not thinking before that or even thinking around that of, you know, the environments that I was in or the people that I was around or even the way that I was talking to myself back then. And then when I think about that, I am kind because, you know, I did come to that decision and I did grow through that, even when, you know, life seemingly became even more confusing than it was because you do get sober, but nothing else changes to your point from earlier.
mm,
And it isn't until you kind of like provide yourself that, you know, absence of substance where you can really kind of like just take a fucking breath. Like that was big to me of just realizing like I never slowed down and because I just thought I was living, you know, by just kind of like stumbling through, I thought I was still pushing forward. And it really took stopping for a minute and just kind of, you know, when you take like a nasty fall on a trail run or something, like you stand up and before you even know what's wrong, you have to just kind of like stand there for a second, start patting around, making sure everything's still there, and then realizing if you can keep going or not.
mm,
And that really allowed me to just like be much more comfortable with that guy because I feel sorry that the person that I am now wasn't there to just kind of say it's going to be all right.
mm. Well, that's such an interesting imaginative thought, for the person that we are now to have been there for the person that we were then, to tell us that everything is going to be okay. Like when I reflect on the person that I was before I got sober, I mean, that person couldn't be more different from the person that I am now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking a lot about that too, specifically with respect to age. Like, I was 22 years old. Now I'm 43 years old. Like, sobriety aside, there's just those two versions of a human, like, couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
And you know, I think with respect to certain things at that young age, like I probably had um, some things that I was particularly mature about, and then other things that I was particularly immature about. but the sum of which all, when I reflect on it, I'm just like, man, I was just like really basic. Like there was no complexity. It was all like no, like no relationship with my thoughts and my feelings, no way to explore them. You know, I mean, you can obviously sort of like think about like a chicken and an egg sort of thing. Like, does substance abuse continue to um, deepen that basicness and that lack of connection? Does it stifle our growth and our development in those ways, emotionally speaking? But when I look at who I was then and who I am now, I mean, it's like there's literally no comparison. And I credit a lot of that to the fact that I've now gone on living my life for another 22 years. So it's hard to sort of pinpoint, like, you know, what things come from what moments and what actions. But it's not it's not something that I can say that I today am who I was then, but just sober. It's like I'm a completely different person than I was then, and I'm also sober. But here, let's look at it like this. So when I was 23, and let's say had been sober for about a year, at that point I was sober, and now I'm sober. And those two people are totally different. Like those two people couldn't be more unalike. Then I guess probably there's things that I can think about the same, but just on an overall growth, like, you know, it just couldn't be like more of a transformation. And so, you know, it, it's kind of like I almost look back on that person like it was a different person.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way because you're absolutely right. I mean, I was 29 when I decided to get sober. And, I would say that I was basic in the same ways in a lot of ways because I didn't think I'd get that far. My grandpa died at 40, my dad died at 39. I was reserved to the fact that I would not be around. So what's the point of complexity? Like status quo was fine because it seems to be working out. Who cares? I'm not going to get there. And it wasn't that I was even trying to like live a lifestyle where I was like going to make it, that I was going to rubber stamp it that like 39, I'm out of here. But it's just like, why try harder if that's going to be my conclusion anyway? And then, I'm 29 in October of 2017. I decided to take 30 days off just because I had done it the year prior. The year prior, I did it and I popped some champagne. I patted myself on the back. This time it comes around and I'm stuck in that moment of I just took that tumble in the woods and I get up and I'm actually thinking about what I just did for the last 30 days. And I look better and I sound better and I feel more awake and I feel more alive. And for the first time in my life, thinking about that age of 39 where my dad was when he died was the most real it had ever become. And I've actually started to see a clock now that I was about to turn 30 in that coming January. And it was like that day when I was like, you have to give yourself this gift. Instead of, and then that's when I started noticing it of like, instead of like living what you think is going to be this inevitable like decline at 39, you are going to fucking rocket fuel past it. Everything that you do from now on is going to jettison you well beyond that. That way you can become that age and more and kind of like wonder why didn't I live beyond that? And it's like upsetting sometimes to think about that it took me that long to kind of have that realization. But I mean, I'm 37 now and I'm not afraid of 39 in the slightest.
That's a really powerful thought.
It's a lot for somebody deciding sobriety to sit with as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wild that we're able to make that what is ultimately one decision that, opens the one door to the hallway of like an infinite amount of doors that now we have access to opening. And then that's really all we get is the access until we're the ones that make the moves of, well, let's go down this hall and let's see what's behind these doors. And often in opening those doors, the opening of the door is much less scary than sitting in front of it and thinking about what might be behind it. So in some ways, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like sobriety is incredibly difficult. In some ways, sobriety is just a key to the things that are difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't want to die. I explicitly want to live.
Yeah.
And I want to live a long time. And I want my life to be rich and vibrant, full of emotional feeling. I may have shared with you when we discussed panic that my first few times having panic attacks, that I thought I was having some sort of like medical episode,
Yeah.
which from what I understand now and talking with people is not uncommon. And every time I would get to the hospital, they'd be like, oh, amongst the slew of questions that they'd be asking me, one of the questions would be, do you have any experience with panic or anxiety? And I would say no. And they would kind of like eliminate that. And they were doing all these tests. And the first time that it happened and I went to the hospital, I remember, I was like sitting there in bed. It had started when I was out, and then I got back, and I was thinking a lot about my uncle. And my uncle died at 39 years old from, you know, either an undetected or an unexpected heart issue in his sleep. And I remember sort of lying there just being like, we need to call an ambulance. Like, I'll be damned, like, if I fucking die right now. Like, because I just was like, didn't call an ambulance or whatever. And, after 4 times of that happening, we were able to determine sort of by process of elimination that it was in fact panic that I was having. And it sort of set me on the path that I'm on now. I remember then speaking with my first therapist after having panic. And it was recommended to me that there were two ways to approach navigating this panic, and that was to take a medication or to do talk therapy, or a third way would be to do both. And so I did both, and I came to this first therapist, in a state of crisis, and was very grateful to have been able to get that, therapeutic support, because I'll admit that, getting a therapist is like not an easy thing to do. And particularly when you're in crisis, your ability to help yourself is limited. And so while that therapist wasn't ultimately like the right long-term fit for me, she was like really impactful for me at the time when, I was going through that at the beginning. And I remember that on like the intake form, if you will, that one of the questions was, have you thought about suicide? And I remember answering the question, yes. And then there was like some other prompt for like elaborating on that or why or what the context was or something like that. And I remember answering something like, because I'm human. And then she brought it up in our first meeting. And I was like, she's like, well, what does that mean? I was like, well, like the question asked if I thought about suicide. It didn't ask if I thought about committing suicide. Like, those things are different to me.
Yeah.
And like at moments in my life when thoughts about suicide have come to my mind, then they are immediately followed by this like powerful feeling of wanting to live and wanting to like, expressly, as I said before, live like a very long life with vibrancy and feeling and like experiences and love and sorrow, all of those things. And she's like, well, what do you mean, like, you're human? And I'm just like, well, I don't know. I mean, like, is that not like a normal thing for anybody to think about? Like, can anybody ever say that, like, they've never thought about suicide? And then it sort of like gets into this thought in my mind where it's like, okay, well, I don't know. Actually, like, I don't even know what's normal. Like, I don't know what anybody else thinks about. I don't think anybody else can say what they know about what anybody else thinks about. So maybe that's not normal. Um, and I have that experience with like all sorts of other emotions too, where I like talk about them with my therapist, and I'm just like thinking like, I don't know, like these things that are on my mind are like totally normal, like reoccurring thoughts for me. Like it, that's probably normal, but then I don't know, maybe it's not normal. Maybe people don't like think about that way. How could we know? So, I bring all that up to say that like I've had these moments where I've been, sort of put on the spot to think about like what living means and how, like, without hesitation, like I choose life. And I think that I can see a lot of what that embodies in my running and in like the journey that I've been on as a runner and the emotional components that relate to like the choices that I've made in running, the goals that I've been pursuing, the the chapters of my life that relate to substance abuse, what you know what parts of that are in my DNA and how those things affect the choices that I'm making and what I've been in pursuit of. And while I have, felt alive doing other things, I have found that when I'm running, when I'm racing, when I'm in pursuit of something that feels like unattainable, that feels like much bigger than me, that feels like something that I can't even, really get my head around what it is that I've set out to do. And then in the course of those journeys, that I feel like the lowest lows and the highest highs, that is living. Like that is me like feeling things on like a real emotional and visceral level. And that has been something that I've connected with the idea of aliveness. And without that, I have felt like not as alive. And so, as you know, but probably the people that are listening don't. I've been injured. I had been injured for like, the better, the better part of the last 7 months. And I think one of my biggest struggles is that, you know, I haven't been able to feel that pursuit of vitality the same way as when I've been running. And without that, then, it feels like, you know, the vibrations aren't as high, man. It's like, you know, it's not it's not like the frequency where I want to be. And then that's been hard for me. It's been hard for me to like understand who I am without that. And then there's challenges of being like, well, if I don't know who I am without that, then is that like a bad thing? Is that something else that I need to explore? Do I need to, you know, do work on this topic with myself? Is there danger in defining ourselves like through what we do, and a lot of questions like this. Um, but I feel like, generally in my sobriety, the last few years, the thing that I've been able to connect it with is this pursuit of feeling alive.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. And I think it's, everything that you just said sounds like a mirror to like my own life. I went through a long, like 9 months of being injured, and I had those same thoughts of like, it kind of worried me at first because I was having those similar thoughts where, like, when I was a drinking person, I tethered so much of my personality to drinking that when it was gone, I was like, no one is going to like me. And that when I was injured and running, I had those thoughts of just like, everything that I love about life is gone right now. And then, like, instead of trying to find that sort of like vigor that I would find in running in something else while I was injured, I poured all of my focus into what can I do to get back to that light that I know is still there. Like, running will be there. And in the same way that I was in like pursuit of life, I was like, I am going to heal myself like I have never done before so that I can go do that again. Because, like sobriety for me, like, sobriety isn't just the lack of drinking. It is everything else that has allowed me to explore my life in like its current state. Like, running feels like that for me as well. Like, it's not just
Mm.
putting shoes on and like hitting the pavement. Like, so much happens out there. Like, I've walked through so many like gorgeous ideas and thoughts, and I'm able to drum up the person from the past and bring him and cradle him. And, out on the road is where kind of like I allowed myself to view me as the previous self and to comfort him and to grow with him than to keep him detached in the way that it was. Like, if not for running, would I have found this sort of like mental complexity that I've been able to grow into? Like, started therapy recently, and the things that I practice in that room, I'm able to take out with me on the run. And, I see
Mm.
articles of people saying like, well, running isn't a meditative space. Well, then why do I feel this way when I'm out there? Like, why in those miles have I grown into something that I never thought possible? Like, thank God for running.
Yeah. Thank God for running. You said something about cradling yourself, and, it created an image in my mind right when you said it about like cradling myself now. And I feel like probably when we were talking about this earlier, you know, you were talking about being kind to our previous selves. And I think that I probably was like, I'm trying to be kind to myself yesterday. And it just caused this image to come into my mind about like, just being kind to myself now. That that that, you know, the things that I'm going through in my life now are no more or less significant than the things I was going through then. It's not like because now I'm sober, everything is less significant. This shit's like just as big of a deal. It's just different. It's like different stuff, you know? So, I think that we can always benefit from cradling ourselves a little bit.
What do you love about yourself?
Mm. I'm a good person, and I have good values, and I have in my life tried to understand and articulate what those values are and have them be in practice in the world as, guideposts for the way that I act and interact with other human beings. And I feel like, that as a compass for me, um, you know, it sort of makes me someone that I feel like is worthy of love. Um,
Those values aren't something that just live in you either. I mean, they are manifest in your businesses and the people that are around you. Like, I've been very fortunate to spend time not just with you, but the people that are in your orbit. And nobody is playing a character when they're around you. You know, those folks that you keep close are close for a reason, and they embody what you have grown. And I think you do a phenomenal job of attracting people that can read what you are putting out in the world. You know, it's not like you are putting a post somewhere that we would like to have this type of person. People see you living the way that you live, and they know that they want to be a part of it. Um, it's funny to kind of like look back at some of your old social posts and stuff like that and see the connection to Wes Anderson, because sometimes when I think about you and me being in Columbus and you being in San Francisco, like I wish that like we could have that literal distance be a little bit more shortened. And I think
totally.
about
Me
Owen
too.
Wilson, Royal Tenenbaums, where he says, "I always wanted to be a Tenenbaum." You know that. I know just because of proximity, I can't work at Trick Dog, but I am somebody who has been attracted to what you put out in the world. And in any way that I've ever been able to work it for, through, or because of you, I've been more than willing to do so. So I hope you know that with people around you, that, they're good on their own parameters, but a lot of them are good because you're good too.
That's really kind of you to say. I wish that our distance was shorter too.
We should just
And
both start running in that direction.
yeah, and I've talked about the Royal Tenenbaums twice today already. So great reference there. Um, yeah, man, that's sweet. It's really sweet.
There's another part about what we had talked about in the first show that we did together, and you referenced it at the top of this call, where the NA space wasn't what it is now then, which is
Mm.
crazy to think about because it's in such a short amount of time. But what does it feel like for somebody like you to be growing within this movement that is growing so huge, and to also be somebody on the forefront and an innovator in that space? Like, what are you excited about in the direction that the non-alcoholic movement is going, and where do you think it could be better?
Mm. It is remarkable to think about how much growth has occurred in between the time of our recording of this show and when we spoke on No Proof the last time. I mean, that's just wild to think about. I mean, there
Like
couldn't have
conditions
been,
aside, like what is just physically on like our back burner.
yeah. I mean, there couldn't have been much more than Seedlip at that time.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there was a little bit more, but not much more. That's wild. Um, Truth be told, I'd love to be more active in this space. Um, I find myself to be like really fulfilled when I am engaged in non-alcoholic conversation, talks, presentations, drink making work, etc. I think that, simply put, any notion of imposter syndrome that I may have about any of the things that I'm involved with do not exist when I am talking about things related to non-alcoholic stuff. And so I find a degree of peace and confidence when that's the world that I'm focused on. And so I'd love to do more of it, honestly. I'd love to talk more about it. I'd love to share more of my perspective about how I believe that the world should engage with people that are choosing to not drink alcohol, and give some more insights about how people that are choosing to not drink alcohol engage with the world, what that means for us in hospitality. It makes me really happy. And I feel like the world has like such open arms now compared to when I got sober and literally every year along the way. And at the time when we spoke on No Proof the first time, you know, I felt like the world's arms were wide open, and literally, like, the arms are like bent around someone's back right now and are like, I love you this much.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. It's exciting. It just, and in many ways, like, you know, it's like, it almost like it helped to like heal past trauma of the insecurities and social anxieties that I've navigated as a sober person for so long. It it interacts with that in like a really healing kind of way. Um, so I'm excited about that, and I would like people to continue making good products and to stop making bad ones.
Yeah, same.
So that's my advice to all of you who are listening.
Josh, what does it take to create globally recognized non-alcoholic cocktails? Every time I've sat at the bar at Trick Dog, you guys present me with something that was like more stunning than before. And every single time I take a sip of one, unlike a lot of different areas, there's no analog. I'm given a cocktail that is just delicious and complex and, you know, sweet and savory or fruity in the best ways possible. And I don't take a sip and immediately go, this is because of this cocktail, or this got to me because of all of these steps that I've had in the past. Like, you guys always deliver something new. How the hell do you do that?
Mm. Well, we we've structured our non-alcoholic offerings to be a few things. First is we want them to have complete parity with the rest of our menu. And so every section that we have on the menu, we have a non-alcoholic thing or multiple non-alcoholic things in those sections. So it being non-alcoholic isn't like its section, because when you do that, then my belief is that you're othering that thing. And we view non-alcoholic to be just like everything else. Like, one drink has lemon, one doesn't. One drink has alcohol, one doesn't. One drink has clarification, one doesn't. Like, these are all drinks, and they are all a combination of ingredients. And some of them have alcohol and some of them don't. So that approach, I think, has, you know, been the foundation for the drinks that we make without alcohol to have the same attributes of, you know, pushing the boundaries, creativity, complexity of flavor, uniqueness of technique, and so on that we apply to our alcoholic drinks. And we've been fortunate that people have taken interest in our alcoholic drinks. They like them for those reasons. And I will also admit that they like them because of the package that we put that all in, because lots of people make great drinks, but we make great drinks. And then people also, tend to have a good time there. They like what we do with our menus. They like the music, they like the vibes, they like the hospo, and all of that stuff, I'll admit, contributes to one's experience when they're having a drink. And I will also say that those same things contribute to someone's experience when they're having a drink without alcohol. But we've sort of put some things in play that, make our drinks feel probably elevated than what people are used to getting historically and probably at most places. Although I'll admit that, we're not the only place that takes our non-alcoholic drinks seriously. And, I really am, I, I commend all the places that I go where I have like great non-alc drinks, because it's just like getting much nicer. One thing that we've thought about particularly is that because of the reality of our product mix, and that while we have non-alcoholic drinks on our menu and we offer them in ways that maximize people's sort of interest and ability and willingness to order them, and so we sell the most of those things that I think that people would order. The reality of it is that we still sell more things with alcohol than without. And so because of that, we've made choices that we can spend more in the creation of our non-alcoholic drinks than we would choose to do on some of our alcoholic drinks, with the simple premise being that the drink that you're going to sell the most of on your cocktail menu, it would be wise for that drink to probably be the cheapest to make. And the drink that you're going to sell the least of on that menu, you can afford to put more expensive things in it. And then you have a spectrum, and, over the course of your period or whatever it is that you do your accounting, you're going to end up with a favorable beverage cost because the thing that you're selling a ton of is, low cost to make. So typically people have only sort of thought about that with respect to like the alcoholic drinks, where it's like, okay, cool. Like the tequila citrus banger, I'm going to make sure is like really cheap to make. And like the drink with like Batavia Iraq and like something weird that like a blogger is going to have is like, can be really expensive because we're going to sell like, a couple hundred of them and it won't matter. And while we are selling a lot of non-alcoholic drinks relative to places that don't offer non-alcoholic drinks, we're still selling like 5 times that for some of our big ones. And so we decided that we were going to make an extra special effort to like make the non-alcoholic drinks like really extra dope, because the people who are ordering non-alcoholic drinks are so used to being like marginalized in this capacity, where it's like, it's not on the menu, or you get a fucking cup of juice, or like all of the things that we talk about. I don't need to go through them, but it's just like ridiculous that this is like what you're being offered, particularly when coming from a place that takes everything else that they do so seriously. That's where the biggest insult comes, is that you have the desire and the capability to do all of these things, and then you make the choice to exclude drinks without alcohol from that and have it be an afterthought and like, something that's just sort of like insultingly uncreative. And so for us, we've made it a point to like throw technique at it, where, techniques that maybe would be too time consuming, too laborious, too costly to apply to a drink that we're going to sell 10,000 of in 6 months, but a drink that we're going to sell 1,500 of in 6 months, we can totally use it for. And so people that order these drinks then get, you know, a cocktail that it's clear has love and perspective and creativity and is not like a ripoff of something else on the menu, but is something that is born out of its own individual idea. And that's something we're so proud of. And so to hear that that's been your response to the drinks that we have there, and that that's, you know, likely the response that many people that come are having, likely the response that I would have if I was a guest at the bar, it makes me really happy to know that people that are choosing to not drink alcohol like us are being able to go into our bar and feel like really cared for and loved. And frankly, more so than people who are just getting good alcoholic drinks, because our bar is so much lower. And so one of the things that I've shared is that my definition of hospitality is exceeding people's expectations in unexpected ways. And everything is unexpected for the person choosing to not drink alcohol. Like, when I go into a place like that and they deliver something of this caliber, my expectations are immediately exceeded in ways that I was not expecting. And the imprint that that has on me for that place is permanent. Um, so I've been really just, it fills me with a lot of love to be able to be one of the places that's taking that part of our program really seriously, and to have people responding to it so positively, and knowing that we attract guests that are coming in because of the degree of comfort that they feel through the program that we're putting together.
Yeah, man, it's so awesome, and it's, incredibly evident. Glad to be a guest taken care of by y'all. What are you
I wish it was
excited?
more often.
Yeah, me too. What are you excited to sip on these days?
Mm. Well, I still love Martini Floreale so much. And I think that it's so good. And anything that tastes like that, I'm also going to like.
Yeah.
Um, I really enjoy it in a Collins glass with ice and tonic and a lime. Earlier this year, I was traveling with my wife, Ruby. We were flying to Marseille. We had a stopover at Frankfurt. And the Frankfurt Lounge has always been one of my favorite lounges anywhere. I'll admit, an opinion that was formed when I was still a heavy smoker. And I would like rush to the lounge there so I could just like power cigarettes. When I went into the Frankfurt Lounge this time to just enjoy, a Wiener Schnitzel or, whatever they had there, they had two types of non-alcoholic beers, and on the shelf with all of the aperitifs that are self-service, they had a bottle of Floreale. I was like, this is unbelievable. And I literally just like pulled it down, pulled out a cold tonic, put some nice ice in my Collins glass, and made myself a Floreale and tonic with a lime, and grabbed myself a non-alcoholic beer and went over, and it was just like so cool and just so like normal. I loved it. I typically find myself to be attracted to the aperitivo style flavors, a little bit of bitterness, a little bit of sweetness, but kind of like, still a component of dryness. I like acidity. I like sort of like full flavor. I get that from the wininess of some of those things. The Roots Divino products, the Blanc and the Rosso, I really love those. I've put those together in like a 50-50 with tonic as well. I really like. There's a cocktail on the menu now that we have that I particularly like too, that is Pathfinder, which is a non-alcoholic Amaro, and some cinnamon, and some fig and walnut bitters, and some Erdinger non-alcoholic beer, and there's probably something else in there. And then we carbonate that whole
Oh, I
beverage.
had that.
So it's, yeah, not just the beer. Yeah. And it's like we serve it in a big, kind of frozen highball mug. And I particularly like that drink because it's just like, one of the things that I'm careful about is like, I don't like things to veer into being a soda. And so that drink to me stays as a cocktail, but it comes up on the line. So like, particularly after a run or something like that, where you're like, I'm thirsty, but I also like, want something that is adult. I've been enjoying that drink. It's super frosty and good.
That is another, I mean, to throw another compliment your way, that is something that I love about y'all's drinks is that the big difference between kind of like something that I identify as soda versus something that I identify as a cocktail is the way that it gives me pause. Like I've had a lot of
Mm,
really great NA drinks that they last 1 second because they kind of lack that level of complexity that makes me want to kind of like pause in between each sip. And that's
totally.
what I get at Trick Dog.
Well, dude, I mean, just because you like it doesn't mean that it succeeds at what it's supposed to be. Because, like, I like a cold can of Coca Cola, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that it's a fucking cocktail. It means that it's still a
Yeah.
Coke and I like it. And so when somebody gives me a drink that is not complex or doesn't have parity with what I think a cocktail should taste like, it doesn't mean that I don't like it. In many cases, like the flavors might be great and it might be well balanced, well executed, but the types of flavors that I'm looking for when I want, like a complex or mature flavored beverage are not that. That's sort of like what I would expect to get, at like at a juice shop or, at another type of place like that. So I think it's important to note that just because I don't prefer something within the context of being at a cocktail bar doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means that it's like not what I would want if I was choosing to drink a cocktail with or without alcohol.
I want to ask you have if you have any closing thoughts, but upon asking that, I want to move it in a different direction. Say we pick this up 5 years from now, the same way
Ooh,
that we did the last one. What
yeah.
message do you want to leave for that version of Josh
Mm,
that's going to be on there?
this is great. Um, I would say that what I've learned in the last 5 years is the necessity of doing emotional and spiritual work, um, which is an exploration. And I feel like the benefits have been tremendous and it is ongoing. And so I'd like to share with myself 5 years from now that I'm doing the work and I hope that there is so much more growth and exciting milestones on the journey for us to reflect on when we get to that time.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Josh.